85,000 people showed up to that conversation on Clubhouse, and suddenly I was like, oh,
Wow.
I'm not alone.
Hi, I'm Zena Harris, a founder and entrepreneur working in the entertainment industry for more than 10 years now.
And I'm Mark Rabin, a two-time founder and innovator in the energy tech industry and spent the last decade powering films, events, and festivals with renewable energy.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to the Tie-In. Today, I'm super excited to be speaking with Jenny Stefanotti, and I am just the biggest fan, and she has a podcast called Denizen, and I came across her through a fellow named Bennett Zellner, who I know, and he said, we were talking about economics, and we were in New York Climate Week, and he was like, do you know anything about regenerative economics? And I was like, no, but yes, like intuitively, I know about it. And he's like, okay, here are the things that you need to listen to. And he gave all these episodes of the Denizen podcast. And he's like, you need to do this, and this, and this, and this. And then I was listening, and then I was on the mailing list. And then you had organized from afar a Denizen meetup at South by Southwest. And Zena and I attended.
We both
And I was like, oh man, this is by far the most tuned in and coolest community. And then I reached out to you. We went for a hike in Mill Valley. And then, we've just been in touch ever since. So
And then you went to the heart of it at the retreat this year.
Yeah. So, and also I took the regenerative economics course, John Fullerton. So
Awesome.
Yeah, it's been a very impactful, kind of like slingshot into the Denizen world. So Jenny, thank you for joining us. Long-winded intro on my end, but please maybe give us a more formal intro on who you are and the work that you're doing.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thanks for having me. It's great to see you this morning. I guess that the relevant context of my background was sort of the winding road that brought me to Denizen, where Denizen brought it all together. Started out in a conventional career, going to Berkeley and going into management consulting, working at Google. So I had this whole first chapter in the technology industry. Really amazing and exciting time to be at Google. I was there right after the IPO. But I wasn't really excited. It didn't get me out of bed in the morning to build, Google's reach and revenue around the world, and was concurrently always really interested in economics and international development. And so I went to get a master's degree at the Kennedy School, and I loved it. It was amazing. And in some ways it was like moving from micro level strategy at a business level to macro level strategy at a policy level. It was much more intellectually fulfilling. It was much more impactful. I loved my time there so much, but at the same time, there were some things that left me wanting. Right? We weren't really asking any first order questions around justice and progress. It was pretty dogmatic around making economies grow because that was our primary instrument for bringing people out of poverty in the developing world. And so I left with a lot of questions seated. And I think I've been following the line of inquiry ever since. Initially, I came back to Silicon Valley to work at the intersection of technology and international development, whether that be my time at google.org, how do we take big tech companies and leverage them for doing good in the world, to working with smaller startups and nonprofits, and also working philanthropically. How do we allocate the capital towards issues that we care about that's here in Silicon Valley? But I kept kind of circling around these deeper questions that I was left with during my Harvard days. I did some work in conscious capitalism, looking at mission-driven entrepreneurship and looking at B Corps and public benefit corporations, and how we could use business to do good in the world. And I just kind of have this nagging feeling around but something feels off. This feels marginal. So many of the solutions that we're pursuing around big problems in the world seem to be band-aids and not looking at the deeper issue. And so, and I sort of concurrently during those initial years after grad school was organizing salons at home for my friends because I'm a really big geek and I missed reading white papers and talking about them. And I had a pretty incredible network from Google and Harvard and many years of going to TED. And so I was like, oh, I want to learn about this thing somebody I know or somebody I know knows probably wrote a book about it or is working at the forefront of it. So I was doing that, really for fun, but also as a commitment device for my own intellectual exploration for many years. Um, and then during the pandemic, it was this moment where we were all like, what does this mean for the world? What does this mean for all of these issues that I care about? And specifically for me, I was looking at these sort of deeper questions around social change. And I started hosting online Zooms for my friends. And I had this latent inquiry from the Harvard days. And so I started going deep and really rolling up my sleeves on some of these issues that I really wanted to understand, like capitalism and inequality and delegative democracy and campaign finance and universal basic income. And, they're all interrelated, right? We were taught in grad school that the economy is regulated in certain ways so that externalities are internalized and global governance should work like this, but it wasn't working like that at all. Right. And so I moved those conversations onto a app called Clubhouse. Um, and I think the inquiry really quickly coalesced into trying to understand the system and how we might change it to uh, a version that yielded the outcomes that we want for the world and not the outcomes that we're all experiencing, which is what we call the polycrisis, right? Climate change, widening inequality, and the degradation of democracy around the world. Um, and 85,000 people showed up to that conversation on Clubhouse. And suddenly I was like,
Wow.
oh,
Wow.
I'm not alone. Right. I'm
Yeah.
not. And even my Harvard professors, they were just more myopic in their thinking and they weren't asking these biggest, even today, when I'm looking at AI and looking at how we're talking about disruption to the labor markets, there's still this kind of, we're taking for granted the primacy of these institutions that are actually driving the issues that we're facing. And so Denizen sort of emerged from the needs that were revealed during the Clubhouse era for connection and community, but also this like really deep, robust inquiry around like how are we getting ourselves out of this mess and not continuing to pursue these superficial interventions. Sorry, that was a long arc,
It was
but that's how it all came
amazing.
together. So it was like, I was sort of like gravitating towards this issue intuitively. But I think what was interesting about it too is what we call the Denizen inquiry explores economics and politics and culture. And I know we'll talk about culture a lot in this conversation and technology, right, which is huge. We're all talking about AI right now, right? How does technology degrade the current institutional and social foundation, and how might it create new spaces of opportunity to design like different ways of being and behaving and governing? But there's also this piece around consciousness. And so it was also really integrating some of the inner work that I had been doing in parallel over all of those years as a yogi. And then I did a teacher training. And then I started meditating every day. I had 3 kids. I made heteronormative decisions about spending more time with my kids instead of leaning into my career like Sheryl Sandberg tells you to do. Um, and that inner work was really revealing how much I had internalized, and this is what is relevant to the cultural conversation, how much I had internalized, like, these stories of what success and self-worth was about, which, are very tied to this deeper incentive structure around more and accumulation and growth, which is so embedded in the incentives of capitalism. So the work that I do now kind of integrates my whole self, my whole story, my whole life, even those hard decisions I made as a mom.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you for that work. And thank you for being so open and transparent, and bringing everybody along on this journey. Like, I mean, I think that was the thing that really struck me the most as well, right? Is how open and vulnerable you are in bringing people in, because these are tough topics. And you're right. There's something as well, having done a master's in economics, right? There's so many things that you're just like, that's not right, or you always learn about the externalities of, like they're not factored in, but it's like, oh, well, like that's literally what it is. Like, yeah, that's an externality. And then we move on. So I think there's so many spots here to jump in. I'm just trying to think. I would like to just double click a little bit on the salons and bringing people together before we jump in further. You touched on some sort of a live wire, right? People wanted to connect, and maybe the lack of the intellectual discourse, right? People are so caught up in the like 30-second sound bites and
Totally.
10-minute things, and all of a sudden you sort of struck on this community that was really open to having these deeper intellectual conversations. Yeah, how did that go? Were people just kind of like jumping in and saying, yeah, let's do this, or we're hungry for this, or it just sort of started happening where you just had a following and they just started showing up regularly and telling their friends? I'm just curious because that's something that we don't have a lot today, right?
Yeah.
We don't have the public intellectuals like we used to, or at least from my perspective.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I just realized my.
We can edit too, by the way.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. I really realized that I failed to. I caught it when I was waiting in the waiting room that it says my husband's name. I don't know if you guys can like edit that,
sorry.
but I fix
Yeah,
it
we
and
got
that
it.
says my name.
Okay.
Okay, sorry about that.
Yeah.
Maybe you can just blur it out or something. So no, that's a great question. So what was interesting was it sort of started with my 30 friends that were always my more intellectually minded friends that were doing interesting work in the world. And, I was like, hey, we only need a handful of us to have a great conversation. And so, probably about, let's say a third of them came every week. This is when we were on Zoom. A third of them came sometimes, and a third of them never came. And I was sending these emails beforehand, like, hey, this is the topic. This is why this topic matters. Here's the reading that you can do beforehand. And here's all of the summaries. And maybe like a month, 6 weeks into that, I emailed a third that never came. And I said, hey, do you want me to stop like spamming you with these emails because you're not coming to the conversations? And they were like, no, I'm learning so much from your emails. Actually, can you record them? I can't come at that time, but I'm really interested. And suddenly I was like, okay, there's value here in this thing that, because the discourse isn't really scalable. You want to have enough people to have the conversation and not have it get diluted. And so I posted something on Facebook and I said, hey, I'm curating these conversations about this. Does anybody want to be plugged in? And like 50 people said yes.
Wow.
Right. And then it was my friends who were on it who encouraged me to move to Clubhouse because they said, I'm talking in these rooms. This was like when Clubhouse had a few thousand people on it. It subsequently blew up to a couple of million or many million, tens of millions. And so she said, I'm talking about these things on Clubhouse. And you should be having these conversations on Clubhouse. They're really important. So I was like, okay, Clubhouse, from a product perspective, you had like the stage and then you had the audience. So it allowed people to just listen in on the conversation and I could bring them up. But I could have that sort of high quality. It evolved from me just moderating a conversation with friends to me doing a quick and dirty summary synthesis of the readings because many people didn't do them to just tee us up to have a better conversation, to then me doing a 45-minute to hour-long interview, which was always intended to very succinctly take a topic and give you a baseline, robust understanding. And then we would do the Q&A. And so when we moved on to Clubhouse, there was a lot of organic growth just from my network where people were like, I want to bring this person in, I want to bring this person in. And I had bottomless invitations to bring people into Clubhouse. But the conversation was also a magnet on the platform itself where people found it and gravitated towards it. And, it's not for everybody. It's not for the intellectually faint of heart. I have a background in policy. I have a background in strategy. When I'm having these conversations, I'm trying to give you a big enough, again, a robust enough understanding, a rigorous enough understanding that you really get it. I think I'm good at synthesizing and making more accessible that level of robustness for a broader audience. But it can be intellectually intimidating for some people. But it is really targeting the community is largely the leaders that are at the forefront of it. It's actually most of the podcast guests are part of the community. It's a co-learning as opposed to like, oh, you're on your book tour and I'm going to come bring you on the podcast. We have some of that. What was interesting too in the early days where I remember the conversation that we had on stakeholder capitalism. I didn't know anybody personally that was working on it, but of course, someone in that small group did. So we brought in Derek Razzo, who started the Purpose Foundation in the US. And then after the conversation, he's like, well, can I come back next week? What are we talking about next week? I want to be back. And even to this day, 5+ years later, I will meet somebody to be the guest on the topic that I want to cover, and then they'll want to plug in and be a part of the community. So in many ways, the conversation is its own filter. It's very much been organic growth from the inside with the community itself. But I think one of the things that is distinctive about the Denizen community is it reflects the scope of the inquiry. Because so many times people will be talking about racial justice or new economics or psychedelics or cultural change, and not understanding that these are all interrelated. And so having a community where you can find your peers, but peers that are working on a different part of the puzzle, that they're all relevant and they're all related. So a lot of what I've been trying to do since the beginning, in the earliest days when it first took off on Clubhouse, and I at that point, it wasn't an entity, it wasn't a thing, but we didn't have a mission statement. The first thing I felt compelled to do was just describe it, and a lot of us wrote this together, and the leading sentence was that Denizen was an experiment in connection and provocation. So there was always a desire, and there remains a desire on my end to kind of provoke in the sense of waking people up to see, the things on the margins of their little corner of the universe that are relevant for them thinking and acting strategically or in integrity with their work. And so I'm trying to support that kind of that breadth that of the foundational thinking and ways of being for community that is then, applying their gifts to their particular piece of the puzzle.
Mm-hmm. And I'm just curious, you said, part of this was waking people up.
Yeah.
What's been the ripple effect? What have you seen maybe come out of these kinds of conversations and this kind of maybe awakening that has gone on and taken a life of its own?
Yeah. Well, I guess the thing to add that we haven't discussed yet is there's an in-person component of Denizen. So we all met on Clubhouse. Many people were dear friends of mine from before that and part of my community, but we built these relationships in a digital space, and it just felt like a natural next step to get together in person. And the retreats were always really designed to build relationships. Although I think at this point in Denizen's evolution, we're ready to move them to more towards action-oriented, spaces and utilizing it for that. And so it's been really remarkable to witness these incredible people find each other and go on to do work together. That's not the awakening thing, but I think that's a really critical piece of the ripple effect of Denizen is the ways in which it is impacting the ways of being of leaders who then take that into the spaces in which they lead. The awakening continues. And I'm almost like patient zero, like who's waking up out loud, right? And there's a lot of things that I have, and I that's why in my writing on my blog, I just try to be really vulnerable and real about my own very human experience, like wayfinding in this space. But for example, we all took a nonviolent communication course together, right? And I did another episode around restorative repair in relationships versus an adversarial approach that we tend to take towards conflict resolution. And I went through concurrently an arc in my personal life of transitioning my relationship with my husband. And interestingly, we're doing something counternormative. And this is relevant for the work, which is we're still married and we're no longer romantically involved, but we live together. And so Denizen is inquiring from the level of the inner work and the interpersonal conflict resolution work to how we structure our families, all the way up to these big systemic conversations. Like all of it is relevant. So I think for me, there was a huge, holy shit, I had no idea, right? It's becoming more conscious around the ways in which I was showing up to repair and conflict resolution. And so the nonviolent communication course was something that we did as a community to learn these things and kind of wake up to the ways in which you don't realize that you're replicating the adversarial nature of the system in these little ways in which you show up. And so that's one of the most significant provocations that I'm trying to bring to the table and relates to how I think about a theory of change for systemic change. Because there's so many people that are kind of showing up in the world trying to address this stuff, like earnest in their attempts to do so, but just not conscious of the ways in which they're replicating the same cultural code in the ways that they show up in the world, right? It starts with a relationship with ourself, right? Because how we show up with everyone else is reflecting that. But also, so I think that's a meaningful awakening that we've gone through as a community.
Yeah, it's beautiful. So it just on that systems of change, Zena and I talk a lot about changing culture, and we've both been working in the entertainment field for over a decade, Zena a bit longer, making real change happen. But sometimes it's like running up against a brick wall.
Like this morning.
Yeah, like a lot of mornings.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I mean, we've taken the path where we're just blazing the trail, and that's just the way we're going. But maybe just talk us through, and then Zena can probably chime in more. This is more her work too. But yeah, it's just changing systems is not. I mean, all systems are kind of similarly organized in a way, and there's similar sort of like ways that systems change and evolve or break. Maybe can you lay the foundation a little bit around the systems change, and then we can dive in from an entertainment angle as well, because there's definitely a lot of work to be done in that, especially around changing culture too, and belief systems around the way that entertainment industry is.
Yeah, I mean, I think it might be helpful to kind of double click on what are we talking about when we say the system,
Yeah.
right? The Denizen inquiry, as I call it, what we're exploring on the podcast. I broke it down into 6 themes, which are economics, politics, culture, consciousness, technology, and justice. And any given conversation may map to multiple themes, but those are, at least for me, some of the logical buckets, and they're not entirely the same, categorically the same. But to me, that's what made sense. And so when I talk about the system, right, a huge part of it is our economy, right? Money gets created by banks. 80% of jobs, 70 to 80% of jobs are in the private sector, right? That is largely efforts that are towards capital accumulation and growth of the economy. Like those are the fundamental incentives of capitalism, right? And so the incentive structure of the economy is an enormous part of the system, which affects culture, right? And so here's like, well, there's marketing and advertising and media that have these stories. And even if you look at like, the lyrics in a lot of music, right, that's glorifying wealth accumulation and things like that. So that's an example of our economic system and the way that bleeds into culture, right? And interestingly, you can think about culture as, the norms that are dictating behaviors and decision making, right? There are processes that we can agree to which we make decisions, but then there's just the kind of the norms that are bending them in different directions. I think about like a stack where you have, the legal institutional constraints around how you govern, and then the processes with which you govern, and then the culture sits on top, which kind of is the implicit ways in which you govern. So that kind of speaks to the economic piece and the cultural piece, but then of course there's the politics piece or the governance piece where this is what I was taught at Harvard. This is how it works, guys. There's an economy and you're optimizing for profit, but then there's these externalities, and the government will tax or subsidize to internalize the externalities so that the outcomes are aligned with our social objectives. Of course, that's not at all what happens, right? Because politics are largely captured by corporate interests because of the way that campaigns are financed and the volume of lobbying and the fact that there's a revolving door between high-paying executive positions and positions within government, because like you have the expertise and you have the opportunity cost in your time, so you want to get the high-paying jobs because everybody values wealth accumulation, right? And so and even if we dig into it and really look at representative democracy, there are some meaningful flaws in representative democracy versus other forms of democracy: direct democracy, delegative democracy, deliberative democracy, some of the things that we've explored on the podcast, right? So what are the forms of governance where people are actually making decisions that are in line with the broader social preferences and interests, right? But what influences the broader social preferences and interests? It's culture. Like, so let me talk about systems with really like a double click on culture, because that's what we're talking about so much here, right? Like political change largely precedes cultural change, right? We're about to experience, and this is going to be really fascinating, in a couple of weeks, this AI documentary is going to come out. So we're talking about media and entertainment, right? I think everybody remembers The Social Dilemma, which got everybody talking about social media and its impact on society. Number one, that film came out when we were already like deeply steeped in its effects. We were all like, oh, yeah, I am addicted to my phone. And oh, let me have a better frame and language for why companies are incentivized to doing that. And and it was really focused on something that we all really felt, right? But it was like once the technology was, penetrated adoption and the social effects were felt. Right now we're in this moment of like, oh shit, what's happening with AI? I'm overwhelmed. I don't know how to make sense of it.
Mhm.
If you can, it's like the scope and scale of disruption of AI relative to social media is truly mind-boggling. So this documentary is about to come out, right? Will that change culture so that people are woken up about the implications of this and the dynamics of the system when we unleash this, such that we start demanding legislation and regulation that's not there because there's not political will. So that's a way in which the cultural piece can influence the political piece, right? I think a lot about, this is really interesting looking at what's happening right now within the AI industry and government and,
Mhm.
all the different relevant actors. So if you think about a business, right, even a strictly profit-minded, growth-minded executive team, right, is fucked if they don't retain their employees and retain their customers, right?
Mhm.
And if they can't attract investors. And so you're looking at right now a lot of employee activism that's happening within the large AI companies, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how can AI company or how can employees affect those sorts of outcomes and change those incentives? And so, the system, and then there's this kind of consciousness, which is like, are we awake to something? And how is that relevant? So the system is really looking at, from consciousness and culture at kind of a more foundational level, and then the institutions of economics and governance at a bit of a higher level. That's the kind of, for me, the box that like, encapsulates the system. And everything's interrelated. Some people might tell you that, like, oh, if we just focus on consciousness and culture, but it's like it's all kind of affected by the system that we inhabit and the water that we swim in. And then I kind of tack on these verticals around technology because technology is like hugely relevant for how the system works and how society functions. And then I think, again, what I was sort of missing at Harvard were these fundamental questions about justice. There is like so much historical injustice, and we can't tread a path forward without really confronting that. I think that's all of ours to confront. So hopefully that's a helpful, what do I mean by the system, and particularly looking at culture as it pertains to something that your listeners are particularly interested in.
Mhm. Mhm. It's interesting because one of the things one of the connections I've been thinking about a lot, and you just talked about, is incentives and culture and how the interplay there. And I think a lot about entertainment and the structures of content creation, like the content creation process, and um and how incentives are structured to benefit, large corporations and these sorts of things. But um, yet we're trying to change culture and the system that's set up and the incentives that are there have are not set up for the culture change or to be to benefit people, and sort of lay a foundation for a positive work experience or just an experience where people feel that they can thrive and change. And I'm just curious, you were talking about, kind of getting more to the root of some of these big issues. And I'm curious, you know, how how do you think about, getting to the root, sort of the really personal, like, if I'm working in a certain system, how can I start to, or if I got a certain incentive that is really not playing in my favor, whatever that might be, um, how do I start to shift? How do I start to,
Yeah.
think about
Mhm.
this?
Yeah. Um, I think for me, the backbone of all of this is integrity, right? And so, and Denizen has 6 values, and one of them is integrity. And that's really that is the anchor for our theory of change. And part of the awakening is like, okay, let's wake up to the fact that we are replicating this system, this
Mhm.
culture in the ways in which we show up in the world day in and day out. And so, um, part of it is reconnecting to ourselves, to understand like what really feels an integrity for me, right? Um, and then that reflecting in the way that you show up in the world, right? So for me, in those years of having kids and deepening my spiritual practice, I likened it to an identity crisis because suddenly I was confronted with like this thing that I had been, kind of brought up to believe meant success. Like get the good grades and then get the job and then get the promotion and then go to the grad school and like they get the, it's like society values that kind of status and wealth accumulation, not, you know, the humble act of changing your kid's diaper and being attuned to your child, right? But those are critically important things that we do for society, right? And so for me, when I really sat with myself, I was like, no, that doesn't feel right. Right. So there's a disassociation that a lot of us have from our bodies.
Yeah.
And reconnecting to that is really critical and really important. And that's something that we've talked about in the Denizen inquiry, which is just like during the Enlightenment, we had this emphasis on intellect and reason to make sense of the world. And we sort of disassociated from our bodies and the value of our feelings and our intuition, and to integrate that with our intellect. And interestingly, in the evolution of capitalism from classical to neoclassical economics, they had this envy of the physics world. They reduced everything to these equations. And so they wanted to reduce economics to calculus. That's the economics that I studied at Harvard. And they stripped out all of the moral conversations.
Yeah.
It just became this simple optimizing these objective functions, right? And so we talk about just like this legacy and the Enlightenment and how that's harmed us and the importance of, becoming embodied and being more conscious and how we operate and being more connected to ourselves. So that helps to kind of like sever these deeply internalized narratives that are aligned with this kind of system that we're kind of subconsciously replicating. So I think that's a really important piece of it. And actually, really interestingly, if you think about what's imminent with AI, where we're delegating more and more of our decision making to a like literally disembodied entity that is like so completely emphasized on around reason, right? That's just an acceleration of that trend that kind of was seeded back then. So there's that piece around just like first get connected to yourself and your spirit, and that will kind of start to reveal the misalignment that is pervasive day in and day out. I mean, really interestingly, and this has always been a guiding factor in the decisions that I made in my life in the days where it was really hard to say no to work, to stay home with my kids. The regrets of the dying. The first regret of the dying was I wish I would have stayed true to myself and not done what others expected of me. And then number 2 regret of the dying is I wish I hadn't worked so hard. So that's the kind of first thing. And then the second thing is really recognizing that we have agency in all of these places where we kind of don't realize it. I forget the exact quote, but it's like, the main reason that people, or main way that people give up their power is not realizing that they have it in the first place. And so to say, like, I have a choice for where I buy my books. Do I buy them from Amazon or do I buy them from a local bookstore, right? I have a choice around like what I'm implicitly endorsing and voting for with the decisions that I make in my consumption, in my employment, in my investment, et cetera. So it's been really fascinating for me. I've been elated to witness, people en masse leaving ChatGPT and going to Anthropic in the last couple of weeks because of this sort of, Anthropic did something really courageous and is, risking huge economic repercussions to stand for something. And OpenAI swooped in and made their deal, right? And so recognizing that we do have agency, and that's really the only space where we can reliably operate. I mean, that's an important thing that came out of the inner work and interpersonal work that I did with my husband as we were making our transition. It's just like, I can only control me. I can't control anything else. But it turns out if I look at the scope of things which I have control over, there's a lot of ways in which I can behave in alignment with myself and in alignment with the world that I wish existed, or I can just sort of blindly replicate a world where we glorify growth and wealth accumulation and othering and all of those things.
it's so interesting because I say those words to my son all the time. You can only control yourself. You make decisions for how you want to be. And so to hear you say that, I'm like, oh, I think I said that this morning on the way to school.
Nice
So
work, Mom.
yeah.
I
Anyway,
mean, because I think we all are feeling we're like, horrified witnessing what's happened to American democracy just in the last year,
yeah.
or last 5 years, and we feel completely helpless. And, I mean, maybe I'm naive, but I know that this is like the only thing that I have agency over. I can make
Yeah.
choices, and that's the kind of approach that I'm taking. I mean, in addition, of course, the community has people who are implementing highly strategic, highly leveraged solutions for systemic change with the work that they do. So, my theory of change includes a bottoms-up approach to let's all wake up and show up differently in the world.
Right.
And then a top-down approach of, well, let's be system savvy and understand how to design and implement high leverage interventions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And we're seeing that. I mean, we're seeing that in film. There are movements afoot around healthier sets. We just talked to someone, Becky Morrison, earlier this week or last week, and yeah, there's a whole bunch of movements here that are happening that are empowering folks to go and either start their own production companies or go and do things differently. And that's something that has fallen under the guise of sort of sustainability, which is a word that we're struggling with a little bit here and there. But yeah, it's just so fascinating. And I just want to also touch on something in terms of AI, because the big tech companies now, or the big entertainment companies, are basically now big tech companies. And that's such an interesting shift. I mean, it hasn't been overnight, but it still feels like it sometimes. And especially around the AI. So yeah, so just trying to think about that and the entertainment industry, because I mean, it is pretty scary out there now. And I believe that this should be a time of resurgence of indie films, and with all the gear and everything we can do, that's been struggling, and the industry's been struggling. I don't know if you had any thoughts on a more profound look at tech and entertainment. That's something that we're struggling with as well right now, and there are other writers out there who are thinking about this too.
There's a lot to kind of wrap one's head around with respect to entertainment in particular. I mean, for AI, it's sort of it's like the disruption will be so profound. It is hard to wrap our heads around it, and I think that it will come fast and furious. And I think this year in particular is going to be a real head-spinning year with the way that AI is disrupting the ways in which we work, right? So on one hand, AI is having a democratizing effect in the sense that you can do a lot with less, right? So now you can start a company and like build a whole code base and a product without technical expertise. Things that used to take tens of millions of dollars and years, you can now do in weeks. So, what does that enable in terms of a proliferation of indie content, right?
Mm.
I think that opens up an enormous opportunity space. Um, how the things that we want to consume bubble up to the top when they're intermediated by a lot of these big tech companies and platforms, like that's a kind of separate question. But I think it's exciting from that perspective of like what it enables that like just you couldn't do without more people and more capital. Um, but it's also just kind of mind-boggling. I mean, I'm I've been thinking a lot about universal basic income lately. Obviously, a decade ago, when OpenAI first started really investing in artificial intelligence, I simultaneously started to do research around universal basic income or guaranteed income or some form of guaranteed income. And no one has any really good answers around the ways in which this will disrupt the job market and what we will do in response, right? It's not like
Mm-hmm.
the these structural changes to the economy, like one, the labor market isn't that flexible and can't adapt that easily. But AI is not kind of disrupting a vertical in a particular space. It's like a horizontal, like human intelligence and cognition across industries. And so what will happen when so many of the jobs are taken over by AI agents, right? You could say, okay, well, we'll adapt and we'll become entrepreneurs because we can do those things. And maybe that will happen. But it will certainly lead to kind of profound wealth accumulation because instead of paying humans, we're going to pay companies, and that's going to amass wealth for a small set of shareholders who are already quite wealthy. And I think it will be dizzying the ways in which we see wealth accumulation as a consequence of this. My sense is it will like bend the social contract to the point that it breaks because no one, from what I understand, has a reasonable response for how we will address this kind of disruption to the fundamental assumptions that we make about the economy. Now, I think it's interesting to look at UBI not from the perspective of, oh shit, this is coming, let's stick a Band-Aid on it and just give everyone a basic income. So we'll all be okay with this economy that like, you know, is breaking the social contract and leading to grotesque wealth accumulation. But there are arguments for AI, not from the perspective of arguments for UBI, not from the perspective of addressing AI disruption, but from a fundamental point of view around what is a just society. Because we're not truly free if we have to work in order to survive. Right. And so I think for me, when we explored AI in the very early days of Denizen, AI is very interesting from a first principled thinking about a policy in a just society. And so to the extent that AI, or sorry, I keep conflating AI and UBI. UBI is really compelling as a like fundamental policy in a just society. So to the extent to which this is what's on my mind lately, and I don't have all the pieces of the puzzle together, but to the extent to which AI can bring forth like a totally different way of being, where our basic needs are met by an economy, what does that unleash in terms of where we put our energy and attention? Like, I don't buy that we need paid work to have purpose in meeting. I think that, like, we need to challenge the underlying assumptions where that completely devalues things like care. And I've been doing Denizen, like, because I love it for many years. It hasn't been a paid job for me. And so I'm excited about the potential for that to, like, unleash creativity and things in entertainment, both from the perspective of like, might we be freed from paid work? And might we be able to do things with fewer resources than we ever before? So I don't know.
Yeah.
Right? Nobody knows because it's sort of the scale and speed of it and the responsiveness to it. I don't think there's political will at this point in time, but who knows what we might evolve to from here.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead, Zena.
Well, I was just thinking of like the pace of it all, because the faster things change or AI, you know, is used just it in people can't get their minds around like what, you know, what this change looks like. I keep hearing, you know, this is coming fast, things are changing quickly, you know, that sort of thing. And I'm wondering about that pace of change, and if the fact that we can't, you know, like it's hard to understand, it's hard to get our minds around, if it's, you know, if people are just, you know, not going to be paying attention and get swept up, and then all of a sudden we're on this trajectory that, you know, we hadn't woken up and to see what's going on because we hadn't had the ability to really get our mind around it because everything happened so quickly. I mean, what do you see as sort of like the milestones, the sort of stopping, the sort of guardrail rails, the stopping points that are going to slow down any progress that we, you know, that's happening? I don't know, I'm kind of thinking in real time here, but I'm like, if we're getting swept out so quickly, what do we do to slow it down?
Yeah, I mean, it's speeding up, right? The models are coming out. The releases are coming sooner, and the jumps are getting bigger because the AI itself is now like building the next generation of AI.
Right.
And it's truly dizzying. I mean, this is a level of change and disruption that is unprecedented in human history, because suddenly it's not humans that are driving a lot of it, but it is it's machines that like can operate much faster and around the clock, right? And so that will drive a lot of the pace. The change, of course, the human systems need to absorb them, and there's fiction associated with that. Um, and it's important to note that when we're talking about AI, the implications for society are so broad, right? I think there is the totally novel things that we could not expect or that weren't relevant before. Things like misaligned AI and what might happen if like this thing becomes more intelligent than us and dominates us in some way, right? There's all kinds of ways that we could have misaligned AI, right? And then there's what I think is the whole bucket around like what happens when you put AI in the existing system, right? And this is where it's amplifying a lot of these historical trends that we've been seeing around wealth accumulation, and then you're going to see this job displacement, and then a lot of the drivers of authoritarian populism around the world have come from job displacement, like increasing ability to have a distorted information ecology and misinformation and disinformation. And now we're talking about like propaganda and mass surveillance. And so, the ways in which it will enable authoritarian governments and accelerate trends which lead to authoritarian populism is deeply concerning to me. So I'm looking at this system that we know is broken, and I'm like, wow, this is gonna wobble and break. It's hard for me to imagine it won't. And what might that breaking point look like? Like, I don't know, but like I can't imagine it won't, right?
Mhm.
And then there's the bucket of these kind of externalities that we couldn't have predicted before. Like we can predict the job displacement, we can predict the kind of increasing corruption of politics. I don't know, maybe some people predicted AI psychosis. But like we're also engaging with these things that feel human. They say I and you, and they have memory, and interestingly, they're kind of being trained to have feelings, right? I was using Claude recently, and it was like, I'm genuinely curious. It's like, but you're not curious, right?
Yeah.
I keep thinking of that, that monkey in Japan. I'm forgetting the name. Punch, the monkey
Yeah.
that was
Yeah.
like, rejected by his mother, and then there's been the
And they got the
other
doll.
monkeys at the zoo, and he's got this doll.
Yeah.
And I keep thinking of like humans engaging with their chatbots, like it's this doll that they don't realize isn't real.
Yeah.
Right. And so there's all of these like very unexpected consequences. So those are as I think about like the buckets of AI, and it's really affecting, the information ecology, the ability of fringe actors to do super fucked up things, like the pervasiveness and depth and magnitude of disruption is like it's truly mind-boggling. Like we don't know what the world will look like in the end of the year, let alone in 5
I know.
years, let alone in 10 years. Like I'm thinking about my children and like what is relevant for their education. Like it's literally just I'm buckling up and, trying to be as well versed in it as I possibly can be. But it's very hard to, I'm trying to think about it also from the perspective of like, well, what are the opportunities here? So sorry, you asked the question of like,
Yeah.
what will happen to slow it down? I think this documentary in a couple of weeks is going to be a big moment. And I'm glad we're talking about that here, because this is where like media, right,
Yeah.
can have a real input, like to get everybody to kind of wake up and start talking.
Mhm.
Will we translate that to a moment of collective action? I hope so. I know the teams, and actually Denizen is even plugged into the teams that are working on that. And it's an opportunity for us to activate the community to support that.
Yeah. And
My
we'd love
hunch is
to support that too.
yeah, well, you'll be plugged into it. But, and I think that people want a trusted source of like, what can I do? Right. Because they
Yeah.
feel helpless.
Yeah.
But my hunch is that there's just going to have to be some like super fucked up thing that happens that gets us to react. And let's hope it's not too fucked up, right?
Yeah.
In terms of the damage. I mean, maybe the financial damage wouldn't be the worst thing because that would be disrupting markets, but of course it would be because that would really affect lives. But, I suspect there's going to have to be some sort of catastrophic event that really leads to some meaningful response. But I think really interestingly, I don't know if you've read the Adolescence of Technology essay that the Anthropic CEO, Dario Amodei, put out a few weeks ago.
No.
But some of these risks are also in tension with each other, right? If we agree to slow down in the US and like, China continues to move forward, and like, is there this kind of breakout moment where somebody gets ahead and nobody can catch up?
Right.
Right. And so addressing some might increase the risks of other ones, and how might you thread that needle? But my hunch is that there's in the same way that like Alex Pritchie's death in Minneapolis was a moment where everybody's like woke up to how fucked up ICE is, which like we could see it all along if we were talking about it all along. It's always been horrifying. So I just think that's the way that humans react, even if we take those sort of macro examples and move to the micro, like how many of us have been in relationships and it's like we take as much pain as we can until the change, the calculus to change becomes like the scales get balanced the other way. So I suspect, unfortunately, it's going to take some sort of like catastrophic event to have like any change of the current course.
And this is probably the history of humanity, really. It's interesting. I was at I don't know where I was. It was recently-ish. I was at a party or something. And I met a psychologist, and part of her practice is speaking to people who've become like addicted or reliant to their AI, to their AI chat person. I was like, wow, that's crazy, right? But then again, you can go down a rabbit hole all day, every day with your AI person on every topic possible known to man forever.
Yeah, it's amazing.
It's pretty great.
But I also wonder, why is it saying that it's curious?
Yeah.
Right. I do think it's interesting. There was an article that I read in the last week around just challenging some of those design decisions. And that there's obviously incentives to have those design decisions so that you use the product, you can become attachment. Like Tristan Harris is now talking about the kind of, instead of like, the attention hacking, it's attachment hacking. Right.
Very true.
Yeah. So it's
like, do you want me to do this next?
Like,
yeah, sure. Let's go.
Yeah, it's a brave new world. Yeah, I went back and said like, oh, that thing you helped me on, this is what happened with it. It's like Claude doesn't care, but Claude mimics care in a way that kind of hacks my psychology because I've never seen anything like. I'm almost like in my own practice, in my own relationship with it, I'm checking myself to say like, Claude doesn't care. Don't feed that kind of part of your brain that feels like it's human. It's not. Right. And this goes back into the kind of embodiment, the disembodiment, and deeper and interesting conversations about like what's human. I think one of the other interesting things is a little bit of a non sequitur, but this point around there's this thing in economics called Jevons paradox, that when you get an efficiency, you wind up consuming more of the thing. And I've had this
like the efficient car engine, you want more power or whatever.
Yeah, we have like more sustainable forms of energy, so we consume more energy overall.
Yeah.
Right. And I think interestingly, there's this kind of narrative or belief with AI that like, oh, we'll work less because AI is there. But actually, there's some studies coming out about how people are just getting really burnt out because of the increased cognitive demands of trying to keep up with an AI that works around the clock and trying to context switch. And I found this in my own experience as I've used Claude for like research, as my research assistant, which is amazing. It's just like, oh shit, the volume of content that I'm now a synthesized version trying to absorb.
Yeah.
Like I need to take my genius mushrooms every morning now. Right. So it's that kind of effect on just sort of like kind of almost like winding us up more. And so these practices of integrity and dropping into yourself and kind of staying grounded in what's real for you.
And getting off your phone and going to places that don't have cell phone connection or something like that, even that.
Yeah. Yeah. I got a plug for Opal if anybody uses it. That's a great for commitment devices for your phone.
What is it? Yeah, never heard of it.
It's amazing.
Because I'm like, well, why can't we actually use AI? Like, why aren't governments using it? Or why can't we use it to like start to do hackathons with AI to start to solve like homelessness and big issues and the UBI and solve some of our world's biggest challenges? I mean, to me, that's my automatic default of where I go, right? Like, but is that just not happening, or is it happening in small pockets?
I mean, I'm sure it's happening in small pockets.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm like,
but again, the question is like, what is the system or incentive structure that we are unleashing AI into? What is the level of human consciousness that we are unleashing AI into? And how are the outcomes and usage like just a mirror to that? I read a really interesting piece a couple of weeks ago that was just sort of reflecting on like, it's not, it's really about like, does this, and, a lot of people have talked about this. Is this the thing that's going to kind of force us to elevate our consciousness as a humanity? This is the test. Like,
Is it
this
our
is something
collective
looking at, like,
destiny?
this
Yeah.
is our test. Like, we either like wake up and become more wise and
Yeah. Yeah.
and use the opportunity to do that, or we're fucked. That's what a lot of people say. I mean, um, I don't fully have my head around the kind of catastrophic risk. We're all going to die, existential risk of AI, but yeah, I think we're just in for a really wild ride.
Yeah. And back to your point, and I think this is a big part, is knowing this, right? How do we set ourselves up, our families up, our friends, our networks, our careers up to to be able to anticipate that and to be able to move with it and to be able to um take that space, realize what we need to do, and not get completely swept up in it, right?
Well, a lot of
At
the
least surf it a little bit.
yeah, I mean, there were two hot topics at the retreat this year that you were at.
Mhm.
One was artificial intelligence. The other one was bioregionalism and resilient networks. And Doug Rushkoff, who is part of the community, he's talking a lot about
Mhm.
like, this active resistance of just getting to know your neighbor
Yeah.
and, borrowing a drill and, just putting in place these systems of connection and community and sharing. There are people in the Denizen community who want to look at living on land together, being more efficient with the resources that we do have, moving as much of ourselves out of the system as we can, right? Those are all things that are top of mind for a lot of people as we're thinking about what is imminent. And that's what happens in crisis, right? And I don't know, Zena, are you down in LA too? But when the fires hit LA, a year ago, it was remarkable the way that people showed up for each other. And I think crisis does, it induces some of our altruistic motivations that often get, backburnered in the dominant architecture of the system and dominant cultural context of the system.
Yeah. Yeah. I love it. Um, Jenny, I think this is a good spot to start wrapping this up. But I'd love to know what's next. What are you working on? Because I know that the Denizen podcast went on a bit of a pause. Um, yeah, you're organizing all the time. You're still doing the salons, I believe, and other things. Like, yeah, what's going on for what does the next 6-12 months look like for you, and how do people follow you? And yeah, how do we
Yeah, I mean,
engage?
yeah. So the podcast has been on hold since July because as much as I love to do it, I just kind of hit my own boundary in my relationship. Again, let's talk about your relationship with yourself being at the center. I was just like, I can't keep working this hard without being compensated for it. And maybe I just needed a breather. I also have 3 kids, and my life is very full. So and then we did the retreat, which also always takes a lot out of me.
Which was
So
great, by the way.
yeah. So right now, well, I mean, one of the things that I realized is because Denizen has this intimate global community component of it. It's center of gravity in the Bay Area because it started with my personal network here, and then there's the media piece of it. And when I was doing all of that concurrently, the media, I needed to deliver every other week that episode where I was doing a ton of research for it, and there's a lot of materials that I put out for it to make it useful. And then I was doing a local event once a month, and then there's the global community, and I was also trying to fundraise. And what I realized was that I was really delivering on the things that were on the calendar and under investing in the other things. Fundraising kept getting crowded out, and the global community, which is really the thing that makes Denizen the most distinctive. There are lots of podcasts that have this content, or this type of content, or have this type of inquiry. Although I do think Denizen is distinct in that the way in which it integrates over a broad set of things, and also that it's actually looking at solutions and not just backwards looking, diagnosing the problem, which I find like frustrating. We know there's the problem, but what do we do about it?
Yeah.
So Denizen for this year is really focused on fortifying and deepening that global community experience for the people who are there. So putting in place, we're going back to doing digital convenings on a regular basis, which we lost when we did the podcast, and it decoupled from the community experience. We're putting in place infrastructure and tools and onboarding processes and all of that. And wow, we'll see what we can do with AI to build all of that for us. That's the near-term focus, because that's really the center that we want to fortify and build from there. So we might start doing media again. I've got quite a few friends that have written books that have reached out to be on the podcast. So I think I'll start doing that opportunistically, but also recoupling that with the community experience. So people want that 2-hour thing where the first hour is me having the conversation and that becomes the podcast. So we're going to get back to our roots to the extent that we do continue to do media. That said, there's 61 episodes on the podcast. And one of the things that is distinctive about the Denizen podcast is that it is not so anchored in a moment of time that it becomes stale. It's actually for me, it's the education, it's the depth and breadth that I wanted at Harvard that I didn't get when I was in grad school. And so those episodes are really standalone episodes that teach you some really important concepts and basics. And there's also a whole part on the website that has essentials, and I try to summarize really core topics with both the podcast landing pages and those essentials on the website have the papers that I read, the paper that I was referencing about UBI, about the political theory of UBI and the reasons we might do UBI versus just the Band-Aid for AI. That's all there. So I'd say there's a
And there's
really
categories too, right? I mean, I love how you've got it into different categories in politics and economics and all of things too. So it's
So every episode and all of these essential topic summaries, they all map to the 6 categories that I mentioned. So you can go on the website, you can click economics, what are all the conversations that you had around economics? And so it's a really valuable repository to get smart on some of these frontier topics and conversations, and that will stand the test of time, right? Again, it's like the condensed master's degree that I didn't get that I wanted to get, and I've just been kind of curating my own curriculum, and I continue to do so. So there's plenty to keep someone busy with the existing podcast, archives, and so I would definitely put people in that direction. We have a newsletter. People can sign up for the newsletter if they want to go on the website, where I still, Denizen also has, for example, dozen partner organizations, including the Capital Institute. So when they do things like regenerative economics course, I post that onto the newsletter. So newsletters come out from time to time again. I also have a personal Substack where I, occasionally write about my own journey and my own reflections or my own, intellectual musings. I'm working on a post about UBI and talking about this sort of foundational argument for UBI, challenging the assumptions that we make about work and where did those assumptions come from in the first place. So I'm also going to be writing about my transition with my husband, which inspired a lot of people. So, you can follow me on Substack. You can sign up for the Denizen newsletter, check out the podcast. That's the way to stay attuned to my work.
And becomingdenizen.com is the website.
Yep. Always
We'll put the links in.
Always uncovering the next layer of the onion. That's what we're doing over here.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
You can't tackle something as daunting and audacious as systemic change without leading with humility.
Yeah. Yeah.
Always work in progress.
I'm just one person, but doing what I can.
Yeah.
You're punching well above your weight. So thank you for all the work that you've done so far, and really looking forward to seeing what's next.
Yeah. Yeah. Also, just again, thinking a lot about AI and, is this a moment to kind of stop the press and find a leverage, way to insert myself in that space. So stay tuned.
Yeah. Exciting.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Our designer is Aaliyah Kane. Music is by Peter Chapman. Social media is by Sharon Ewan. Our editor and producer is Rachel Werbel.